Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
I'm a Yankee Doodle dandy. Oh, no, I can't sing, but I can be a patriot. As a matter of fact, a Washington Post public opinion poll found that 93% of those surveyed reporting feeling patriotic about the United States. But what is a patriot? Is it someone who stands on the street corner during the 4th of July parade waving a flag? Or is it someone who critically examines this country, trying to improve or even perfect it? Today on Public Affairs Roundtable, we won't sing. We'll talk about patriotism around this 4th of July week. Our panelists are John Rouse, producer of this program and a member of the political science faculty at Ball State University. Jim McClure, an economist with the Ball State University College of Business. John Ernest, Grant County Republican chairman and a member of the Indiana Republican State Central Committee. And State Representative Hurley Goodall, a Democrat from Muncie. John, you have different definitions of patriotism from time to time. In the middle of April, a patriot is somebody who pays his taxes. What is a patriot on July 4th?
A patriot, or the concept of independence, is this. Our society has been successful for a couple of reasons. We provide alternatives to our citizens. And in other words, the American system, the American society of economics and politics is one that provides alternatives, options. If the economic system and the political system do not provide options to their citizens, our system of patriotism is not working as well as it could. So it's those two things. Ask yourself, do citizens have options and alternatives?
Do citizens have options and alternatives, Hurley?
I don't know about options and alternatives. I think John makes patriotism a little complicated. To me, a patriot is a person that really understands what the Constitution says and what this country stands for. And the two basics are freedom of speech and freedom of thought. And I think that's where all of our freedoms and our system springs from. That we have the right to express our views, to think the way we want to think, without the government coming in with stormtroopers and crashing down on us. And I think everything evolves from that.
John, is patriotism a political issue?
Well, I don't think patriotism is a political issue. I think a patriot is one who loves his country, supports his country, is willing to defend his country and their interest with a great deal of devotion. And you don't have to be a Republican or Democrat to be a patriot. You don't have to be black or white to be a patriot. It's just an important part of our whole process that makes us appreciate what we have.
From an economist's point of view, Jim, is there anything more patriotic than making a profit?
Well, I was listening to all these fellows give their opinions about what being a patriot is on July 4th, and my view is sort of a traditional historical one, and in that I think being a patriot means being opposed to large taxes. Here we are, this country was founded on the notion that taxes were too high, taxes were oppressive, and here we are in the 1990s now with taxes that I think are extremely oppressive.
If I can get back to my more or less esoteric definition, if the economy is not growing, we are as free as long as we have money in our pockets. If we do not have money in our pockets, if our system is not producing in terms of economy, if there are not options for all people in our society, regardless of sex or race, our system is not doing what it could, and therefore we start dividing up an increasingly smaller economic pie. So if the options and the alternatives are not there for all Americans, regardless of economic status, if you have a chance to buy that boat or to buy that new television, to spend that money because you're producing, if we're not producing, our patriotism is not producing.
And to go along with that, the incentives to produce, the whole supply side economics thrust was that we can produce more and gain more tax revenue if tax rates are lower. So low marginal tax rates have produced a sort of a renaissance in the 80s for us, and maybe George Bush is thinking that it's time to play around with what he thinks is voodoo supply economics, when in fact it produced a very large measure of success in the 80s for us.
Are you guys arguing then that the system The American system now, the economic system, the political system, is not very patriotic?
No, I'm saying that's the core of patriotism. The economic and political system under which we live is very different from those around the world. For example, I just got back from China. I can tell you for sure, in terms of my perception, that systems do matter. And if systems are not open, the less political freedom you have, the less economic freedom you have. The more economic freedom you have, the more political freedom you have. We have to focus upon those two things for our system to continue to be successful.
Well, I disagree. I think if we turn patriotism into an economic thing, I think we're losing sight of what this nation was really all about and what it was founded for. In the area of taxes, it's my feeling that there are certain needs that the country and the people of the country have. And in the question of taxes, it's more a question of fairness than how much. The system is not fair the way it's structured now. And that's what people rebel against. I think people understand if we're going to have good schools and good teachers, good law enforcement, good police officers, good firefighters, all the other garbage pickup, they've got to pay for it. People are realistic enough to realize that. But the system is not fair. It's not structured fair, and that's what they perceive, and that's where the rebellion comes in.
You know, I did have a chance to just look up the term patriot before I come in here, and not once did I see the term political used in there or the term economic used in there. You know, if you want to talk about politics and economics, to me that's one concept or one part of our society. Being a patriot is another part of the society, and you know, our society is made up of many different parts. You can be maybe down and out, but still be a patriot for your country. You can be in the best political position in the world, but still, and yet be a patriot for your country. Being a patriot takes in a lot of different types of people in a lot of different areas and for a lot of different reasons.
But we're talking about being an American patriot, which talks about independence, 1776, and the ability of the American people to be independent. In other words, to choose economically, choose politically, Bill of Rights. And so our patriotism is very different from patriotism in Germany. Germany is now realizing its patriotism for the first time in 50 years. So German patriotism, Chinese patriotism is very different from the history of American patriotism.
Well, John, are you saying that your patriotism is based on how much you get from the system?
Absolutely.
I think that's backwards. I think it's absolutely wrong.
If you don't have political rights like the Bill of Rights, like you said, if you don't have economic rights, the whole meaning of shooting those fireworks up into the air on July 4th is diluted.
I couldn't agree more with that. This country, I keep coming back to this country was founded because a group of individuals, the people in the colonies, decided that the taxes were oppressive. I don't think there's anything more appropriate to talk about than the fact that taxes are oppressive today, and the taxes are stifling the economic growth in this society. When this country was founded, we saw a period in which this country grew faster than any other country in the world. Now, the growth rate of this country has slowed down significantly. Why is that? You might ask, what's the reasoning for this? Well, one of the reasons is that taxes are stifling the economic growth process.
I disagree.
Yeah, I disagree too.
I disagree.
Because
Compared to what?
Having been the tax man on this show for several months now,
Calling for higher taxes over here. Yeah.
Right, calling for higher taxes. The problem is you have to have tax revenues so you can finance the infrastructure. And if you don't finance the infrastructure, a fancy word talking about highways and schools and those kinds of things, if you don't continue to provide the infrastructure for the private citizen to interact, you're not going to be able to be successful or as successful. You have to have good schools. You have to have good highways. You have to have the appropriate funding. Otherwise, you will not have that economic interchange.
Are you writing the Laffer curve here, the supply side end of it?
But the recent studies show about education that more spending is not going to solve the problem. That it's not a case that we're spending too little on education. We don't need to tax more. We don't need to tax people more to improve education in this country. As I said on another show, what we need to do is to increase the competition among schools for students, as is done at the college level.
How do you pay teachers good salaries if you don't tax to pay for them? I still say it's a problem of inequity in the tax system. To me, people who gain the most out of the system have the obligation to put more back in, and there are a lot of people that fight against progressivity in taxes.
You talk about fairness.
Yeah.
Why is it more fair that a person who earns more should pay more?
Because they get more out of the system. If I go to the grocery store and get more groceries than you get, shouldn't I pay more money for them?
Okay, they pay more money, but should they pay a higher percentage? Should they pay a higher percentage?
Absolutely. The person that gains the most from the system has the responsibility to put the most
Look,
back.
if I make $1 million and pay 10% of it, I'll pay more than if I make only $100,000.
Not a percentage of the money that you have left.
But why? What makes it fair? What makes that fair to pay a larger percentage?
Because you're getting more out of the system that we live in,
and
so
you pay
it's your
more,
obligation to pay more
and you
back.
pay more dollars.
But wait a minute. Are we talking about taxes? Are we talking about patriotism? You know, to me, that's two different topics.
We're talking about economic freedom here.
Economic freedom. Well, that's not patriotism.
Sure it is.
Sure, it absolutely is.
Because patriotism involves sacrifice, and I've got to give my definition of patriotism.
Sacrifice not being a millionaire and only want to pay 10% of your salary in taxes while you make the poor guy
I think there could be nothing fairer than to have everybody in this country pay just 15% of their income.
That's crazy.
Well, I think you're crazy.
Well,
so what? So what?
That's just your opinion, and you know, everybody has an opinion in this system. Patriotism is three things. Number one, it is fairness, as you've said. In other words, are we fair in the way that we deal with people? Is the system fair to all comers, male, female, black, white, whatever? Is the system fair? Number two, in terms of this economic political system, are we productive as citizens? If I'm commissioned to produce a weekly program on public affairs, do I produce the best kind of program? How productive am I today? How productive are we as citizens? And number three, if I can get, is the issue of honesty. Are we honest Americans in terms of, if we're honest, we perhaps are also productive? So as we look at our economic system, we have to ask ourselves, are we fair to each other? Do we produce, as a lawyer, for example, John, are we the best lawyer? And number three, are we honest in our work? Do we put in an honest day's work? If you take those three things and ask every citizen, are you honest in terms of how you deal with people? Are you fair to people? And do you produce? That is American patriotism.
Okay, you don't produce, so you're not a patriot.
Absolutely you're not.
I'm not quite sure I agree with that.
I mean,
you know, just because I don't produce 8 hours on the job, that's no sign I don't produce when I get off work in some other way, or contribute in some other way.
Okay, contribution is what I'm referring to. I mean, we have to produce as citizens so we can be productive. America is an active society. We are not a passive society. We are active people. We do things. And the reason we have been successful is that we do things and we don't sit. We are productive. So if you're not productive in your job, perhaps you're productive in your church, or you're productive in your political party, or you're productive in any number of things you might do.
Well, I think if you'd ask anybody, they'd say, yeah, I'm productive, but that doesn't mean it's true because they say it and because they think
because they're not being honest with themselves. They're not being intellectually honest about the work they do on their job because for one reason or another, they're not functioning as they could on their job.
But what you're saying is that each individual works in a unilateral way, and that doesn't happen. When the guys go in the Chevrolet plant out there in Muncie, they have to work with the equipment the company provides them with. If they don't provide them with the latest, modern, most up-to-date equipment, they can say they aren't producing a full day's work. Is that the worker's fault? He goes in there and he works at the machinery that they give him. And if he's not producing what somebody else thinks he should produce, can you blame that poor guy because he's working with machinery that's 25 or 30 years old? He's still putting his effort in, doing all he can do.
I think you have to ask the question, is management being fair then? Is management being productive? Is management being honest? And is management being fair to labor?
Well, you know, that's management's decision. To me, most companies that go under is because of mismanagement. It's not because of the workers. In the plant, the worker goes in there and does what they tell him to do in the best way he knows how to do it. And if they don't guide him properly, they can't blame him for function not working.
The contribution has to come from both ends.
Right.
I think contribution is a better term, though, than production.
Okay.
You know, production, you got the guy out in the Chevrolet plant trying to do the job. Contribution is contributing to society, whether it be in a volunteer sense, whether it be in a
I agree, John.
Producing sense.
In other words, it's not waving flags, because any one of us can. It's easy to wave flags, but it's something else to make a positive contribution to our society. I mean, whether we're picking up garbage or things on the street in terms of...
But how does that differ from this country to any other countries? So being a patriot in France is picking up the garbage, and picking up the garbage in America is an American patriot. I mean, we're talking about what's uniquely American. I don't think that this discussion tells us anything particular about America. Now, I'd like to change the topic a little bit. I'd like to talk about immigration. I think the history of this country shows that we're a country of immigrants. Most of us were immigrants, and that policy's changed now. And now we're imposing sanctions on employers who hire illegal Mexican aliens. And the question is, what's caused that to happen? And to me, what's caused that to happen is the social welfare system, which no longer makes it assured that when those people come to this country, that we gain. Certainly they gain, but is it clear that we gain from those illegal immigrants?
But has our policy ever been designed to attract illegal immigrants? I think if immigrants come in this country legally, it's one thing, but people that cross borders indiscriminately, it's a different thing.
But people came here en masse from Ireland and from
But they
Europe.
were illegal immigrants.
That's
they
right.
didn't come into this country illegally.
So why aren't the Mexicans allowed to come to this country? Why don't we have an open border?
They all have a process that they have to follow, whether they come from Ireland or France or Mexico or China or wherever.
The question is, why in the
follow the
past?
process.
Why in the past was our policy much more open than it is today? And I think the answer is that we have a social welfare system that no longer makes it to our benefit to welcome everybody, as we did in the past.
No,
I disagree.
I think you're incorrect on the history, because we've always had regulations against immigration. I think the point you're trying to make in terms of patriotism is that the definition of patriotism in our society will change as the clientele, as the people, as we become more Hispanic, for example, with that focus of new immigrants coming from the Southwest or from the South, the conception and work ethic and the perception about the contribution of patriotism in our society will change. So as the economics and the politics and the clientele change, so will our focus upon patriotism.
It will depend on who the elected officials are in making the decisions. In the early years, the immigrants that came from Europe, the people making the decisions were Americans that came from Europe. So they were sympathetic to people that came from the country. If the Mexicans and Spanish-speaking people become political powerhouses, they will become receptive to people
I don't think that's the explanation.
I do.
Well, you know,
I just don't believe that. Because there were biases against the Irish.
Do you think if the Congress was
Irish were easy to
50%
identify,
Mexican
too. They had
American
red
that we
hair.
would be having the problem we're having? You've been smoking funny weed, man.
Well,
You know, the great thing-
Those comments aside, I think the evidence bears me out. I mean, one of the symbols of this country is the Statue of Liberty. And on the Statue of Liberty, we have some fine words that talk about allowing other people to come to this country. So to the extent that that's a national symbol, to the extent that that's patriotism, why don't we have open borders?
That's what John and them teach in their political science classes, but that's not reality. You don't separate your heritage and all from your political decisions if you're in political office. If
Well,
you're
it's an issue.
an Irishman, you're more receptive to Irish. If you're black, you're more receptive to black. If you're Mexican American, you would be more receptive to Mexican Americans, and that's what folk makes the policy.
You know, the great thing about this, though, is that there's enough flexibility within our Constitution and the framework of our government that we can roll with the punch, whether it be the 1800s or the 1850s or the Irish potato famine or coming right on into the 19th and 20th century and just being flexible enough as a nation to adopt to that particular period of time. We all know of countries that you might go to in the world where you don't have that flexibility. And we are flexible. We are willing to adjust. You know, Hurley and I probably come from entirely different backgrounds, blackgrounds.
Right.
And for that matter, we both had different opportunities and alternatives and options throughout our life in an effort to do the best we could possibly do at whatever we're going to do. And
but the question is, what system allows the common man to achieve his full potential? And I think if you look around the world, you'll see that those situations that where we have big government, where we have control, where we have tyranny, we see the common man doing poorly.
Name me a country
example,
other than the United States that you can go to and be able to do exactly what you want to do.
For example, let me finish. For example, in Hong Kong, we see a situation where people are flooding out of that country. Why do you suppose they're flooding out of that country? Because they fear the system, the oppressive system that John has witnessed in China. They fear the takeover.
But Jim,
doesn't have anything to do
government
with
is not a
patriotism.
big part of our society. We may think it is, but it's only 33% of the gross national product in terms of its contribution. And so we don't have big government, as much as the Republicans might want to tell you, we don't have big government in our society.
I totally disagree.
Well, in comparison to France or Western Europe,
true.
or certainly Eastern Europe, or certainly
Undoubtedly,
a place like
New
China.
Zealand or Australia, where the tax
Undoubtedly, that's
rate is
true.
much more than 50%.
Absolutely.
Undoubtedly, that's true. But the question is, being an American patriot to me means doing something that's maybe by comparison extreme. What we did in this country was something extreme. We developed a type of government that was unique in the world. We developed a unique climate in which economic growth occurred. And to say that, well,
And just being better than Australia or New
country.
Zealand doesn't make it good. Just because we're better than France or England doesn't make it better.
Well, we want to make anything that we do better. Now, the question is, what is the framework you want to work in to make it better?
Well,
you can go out and burn a flag in order to make it better, or you can go out and
No, but that's not what I'm talking
have a
about.
riot in order to make it better, but that's not the way you make it
What
better.
I'm talking about is limited government, the principles under which this country was founded. Limited government and limited taxation.
Limited government led to the S&L scandal that we got right now.
No.
You're absolutely
that's completely
regulation
incorrect.
did it.
I'm sorry, that's incorrect.
Regulation has screwed up our phone system. Deregulation screwed up our transportation system.
Deregulation.
Somebody
that was a Democrat president
well,
did that, wasn't it?
I don't care. Somebody has to overwatch the greed of people that naturally comes through
so
when
it
the
gets
system
back
is
to
unrestructured.
individual-
Then it becomes the strong devour the weak. And I think
I'm
government
sorry,
is there
but
to
that's
level
not-
that playing
that's
field.
On this patriotic day of July 4th week, we can just thank God for the American people. Because if we had to resort to the American politicians, in terms of, it gets back to the issue, we individually have to be honest, we have to be productive or make contributions, and we have to be fair.
Well,
If
I
we
disagree
cease
now,
having
John.
a
You're
system
attacking a politician, and I think the politicians reflect the society, and I think most of the people that I've met in politics are honestly striving to do the best that they can under difficult circumstances to make tough decisions that they have to make. And I think we should be thankful that we've got the kind of political system we've got. At least the people can change those representatives periodically if they don't like what they're doing. And I don't think that peaceful transition happens too many other places in the world.
Looking at patriotism from the political, social aspect of it, I've got a story here out of Little Rock, Arkansas. It says the Ku Klux Klan leaders have been given approval to hold a 4th of July flag rally on the state capitol there in Little Rock, just hours before a scheduled flag burning by a local black activist. Is there a patriot in there somewhere?
Well, I think, to me, that's what patriotism, what our country is all about, that
It's the alternative to burn a flag.
tolerate other people's views. I obviously have no use for the Ku Klux Klan, but I think they have a right to say and espouse what they espouse as long as they don't transmit their violence and other things on other people. As far as their ideas and thoughts, I think that other people have the right. I think that's what this country is all about, what makes it great, what makes it so different. You can criticize the President of the United States and no stormtroopers are going to show up at your door at midnight and haul you off to jail.
I agree completely with
and
that.
I agree with that, too. And the more esoteric way I would say it, getting back to the political science teacher and me again, is that you have the freedom to raise economic and political agenda, whether it's the KKK or whether it's somebody else who is going to wave flags. The ability to have those options, to raise those alternatives in society to give somebody else to respond.
Well,
to.
everybody wants to espouse those options, but it's being able to allow other people to have those options that's a true test of patriotism.
Tolerance.
There's so many people here that want to crush those people because they don't agree with their ideas and with what they're expressing. And I think that's where the true test of patriotism come in. You know, not me being able to go out and do this or do that, but for me to be broad enough to allow the people that I disagree with to have their point of view and their say. I think that's the true test of patriotism.
So patriotism means that the people have power.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Economic power and political power.
Now, economic power depends on, I keep coming back to this. Why doesn't it make sense to you folks? Economic power depends on private property rights. That's one of the founding conditions of this country, that I have my private property rights. Now, to the extent that the government controls resources, I control less of my own resources.
Well,
that takes away my power as an individual citizen.
Well, only if you agree to pay the piper, or if you don't want taxes, don't have services. If you don't want the services, don't pay the taxes, but you got to be honest about it.
If you don't, I mean, if you don't want these types of rules and regulations that you're just talking about, sure, a man's home is his castle, and you've spent a lot of money in your home, and you live there and you love it. But if we don't have the types and rules and regulations that you want, who's to say that a striptease joint couldn't be next door there?
Let me ask you this: are you willing to pay $1,000 for a toilet seat that goes on an Air Force jet?
Sure, because you know who.
Come on, are you willing to pay $200?
You know who benefited from that?
But the political system won't let you.
But that's completely different from the overall system. To me, you know, you can convolute any subject, and taxes can be a dirty word. But to me, when we pay for young people's education, that's an investment in the future of this country.
That's fine.
And I don't mind making that investment. When we build a highway that will move traffic, that's an investment.
But we sit here and talk about how fine politicians are. Let's point out that politicians make their fair share of mistakes, and that
just as economists, just as everyone else in the United States.
Well,
that whole toilet seat thing is a red herring, because who made the money? Who charged for the 1,000-seat toilet seat? Some private.
Who paid for it, though?
The taxpayer paid for it. But
have
who
you ever been through the bidding process for the federal government?
Who paid for it?
You know, the bidding process for the federal government is ridiculous to start out with.
And
my point exactly. So why don't we turn more activity over from the government to the private
sector?
We
do.
Now I'm going to go. I'm going to go a step
jails, further. Who builds highways, and who pays for airplanes? It is the private
I'm a
sector
Yankee
that does.
Doodle Dandy. We're out of time today. This is Free Expression at its best. John Rouse, Jim McClure, John Ernest, Hurley Goodall. Thank you for being with us here today. I'm Larry Lough. See you next week on Public Affairs Roundtable.
Public Affairs Roundtable is produced in the studios of WIPB Channel 49 on the campus of Ball State University. The producer is John Rouse. Listener comments are welcome.